Hello everyone, I'm your hostess with the mostest 8-second gaming, and in today's video we are going to be talking about the early season 20 weapon tier list. The weapons did not receive as many changes as the legends did, but there are still some movements up and down in the tiers, so let's break these all down so you know which weapons to be using in your rank grind so you can best put yourself in situations to win and gain tons of RP. But before that, Apex is not the only game that I have been no-lifing this season, and bear with me on this one because this game does get a bad rap. And we are talking about Raid Shadow Legends here, and the bad rap comes from 3 misconceptions. First off, people complain that it's brain dead. There's no strategy, there's no depth, but they are wrong. Raid has over 800 unique champions, and it is up to you to figure out how to best use them. There are dozens of different boss fights in which some champions work better than others. Champions that work well together and those that really don't. And that whole thing comes together like one big giant puzzle for huge brain gamers. But the challenges don't stop with the dungeons that you're seeing on the screen now. We're talking practically endless endgame progression by the time that you hit the Doom Tower and the Cursed City. Another huge misconception is that Raid is some sort of huge time sink. Now, while that might be the case for me and many others, it's because I'm what the kids these days call an addict and I have a hard time putting the game down. But for most folks, and maybe even including you, that does not have to be the case. First off, there's an auto battler feature in Raid, so you can set your team up to farm content while you're in an Apex game. And the final big misconception about Raid is that it's all pay to win. Now, obviously putting some cash into the game is going to help you progress faster, but there are literally thousands of accounts across YouTube that play Raid for free and are incredibly powerful while doing so. And while there's so many different ways to play Raid Shadow Legends, there's only one correct way to sign up for it, and that is by clicking the link at the top of the description or scanning the QR code that you see on screen now. And why is it the only correct way, you might ask? Well, that is of course for the free stuff. By using our link, you will unlock the epic attack champion Juliana as soon as your account hits level 15. You'll also be starting your journey with 500,000 silver on top of a few other beginner bonuses. So if this sounds like something you want to do, once again, click the link at the top of the description or use the QR code that is on screen now. And once you're there, make sure to join our clan as well. It is beginner friendly. It's called GL Bootcamp, so you can learn the ropes with some people helping you along the way. You can also find the link to the GameLeap Raid YouTube channel in the description below, so go subscribe to that as well for tons of beginner guides. But okay, with that done, let's move back into the tier list, and to start things off, we have to talk about one thing in particular, and that is the care package weapons. Every time we do a tier list, people always ask, where are the care package weapons? Well, the care package weapons will not be on this tier list because they are in a league of their own. Every care package weapon, and yes, I am including the bow check here, is incredibly strong in their own right. There's no real spot for these on the tier list because they would all just be S tier or even S plus, so we just leave them off because they're in a category of their own. So now that we're all on the same page, let's start off at the bottom and work our way to the top. So the D tier, there's 2 guns finding themselves here, and that is the P2020 and the RE45. These are just essentially both light mag holders, and yes, with hammer points they can put in some decent work. I myself actually use the P2020 quite often if I do find hammer points, but in the grand scheme of the game, both of these just are not worth it. The RE45 is a little bit more viable than it has been in past seasons because it does have the option to run the digi-thread now while SMGs don't, but even then it does not have the fastest time to kill. You require hammer points in order for it to actually be semi-decent, and in most up-close personal fights you're going to get just absolutely bodied by a better SMG like a Prowler or an R99. There's no real reason to use these guns, and that's why they're in the D tier. But now we can move into the C tier, and there are 4 weapons here: the Devotion, the Rampage, the Spitfire, and the Triple Take. Now the 3 LMGs are all just basically here for the same reason. They're not really meta right now. The meta is more fast style death bally fights, and if you don't have the stray speed to really keep up with that or the handling as well, you're going to fall behind in fights. Yes, these can put in work. The Spitfire is incredibly easy to control and you're sending a bunch of bullets downfield, but they're not the most versatile and they don't fit into a ton of different situations. If somebody's really pressuring you, you are going to fall behind in the damage race because they are just going to be able to play around you a lot easier. Now don't get me wrong, just because these 3 are down in the C tier doesn't mean that they are bad. If you have them in the right circumstance, they can absolutely shred and be super annoying. But again, in the grand scheme of the game, they're not the best option, so that's why I have them in the C tier. And the Triple Take is basically the same thing. It's not the best marksman rifle and it's not super versatile. I know that some people say, oh, but the Triple Take can be used as a shotgun if you get into close range, and no, it cannot. It is going to lose to an SMG or an actual shotgun. If you try to use this as a shotgun in close range with somebody that actually has their monitor turned on, you are going to lose. And when it comes to the medium and long range fights, yeah, it can be a little bit spammy, but the 30-30 and the G7 Scout are still better, and also sniper rifles are just a better option as well than this. The triple take is just not the best option right now. It still is a good energy mag holder for when you find, say, an L-Star or a Nemesis, but until we see some buffs for it, I'm going to be keeping it in the C tier. But now we can move into the B tier, and there are again 4 weapons find themselves here. We've got the alternator, the charge rifle, the R99, and the longbow. Now I'm sure some people are rushing to the comments to already call me out about putting the alternator in B tier. They're gonna say it's so easy to use and disruptor rounds are so broken. Why is it in B tier? Well, the reason it's in B tier is because it's not the best weapon in the meta. Is it easy to use? Yes, absolutely. Are disruptor rounds good? Again, yes, absolutely. But the alternator just by itself is not a top tier weapon. It loses out on a lot of straight up gunfights, and as soon as you get into kind of medium to long range, you are going to be losing even harder. You really need disruptor rounds to keep up in those distances, and relying on finding a gold hop-up when there are multiple on ground loot already isn't the best option. The alternator also doesn't have a barrel stabilizer anymore. It has the laser sight attachment. So although it is pretty easy to control and you should be fine in the medium distances, it's still not the best. Assault rifles that do have the barrel stabilizer like the R301 are still just going to outclass it in every way possible. So that is why it's in B tier. It's still a solid weapon, but it just gets outclassed, so it's a middle of the pack weapon, therefore B tier. Next up we have the charge rifle, and the reworked charge rifle is not nearly as strong as the old charge rifle. Yes, it has the potential to absolutely decimate somebody if you have the distance with it, but the charge up time for it can lead you to miss shots and also miss opportunities on people. If they're running around, if they have good movement, if you don't have the best sight lines, then those can cause you to let people get away, and it's just not the best option when it comes to sniper rifles anymore. I'm a much bigger fan of the old charge rifle. I don't think the rework was necessary. Now it's basically just a mid-tier sniper rifle. If you use it and you can hit some headshots on people that are far away, it's gonna just absolutely decimate them, but it's not the best option, so yeah, B tier. Next up though, we have the R99, and this has been running amok in the last couple seasons, but Respawn has nerfed it and now it is a lot harder to control, therefore taking away some of its viability in the meta. The R99 before was not the easiest thing to control. It was still fairly simple, but again, not the easiest, and now they've made it even harder. So unless you have pretty solid recoil control, you're not going to be able to use this in anything other than being right next to a person. And in that case, you're probably going to get beat by a shotgun or just a better SMG like the Prowler. The R99 is kind of falling off once again, so that is why I'm putting it in the B tier. And the last weapon here is the longbow. Now the longbow can be spammy. You can send shot after shot after shot. It can do some pretty good damage, but when it comes to a long range spam rifle, you'd rather just have something like a marksman rifle like a G7 or a 30-30. And when it comes to heavy hitting sniper rifles, you probably either take the charge rifle or the sentinel over this. The longbow just isn't the go-to sniper rifle anymore like it has been in past seasons, and right now it just kind of feels like a middle of the pack weapon. There's nothing that really makes it stand out or special right now. You could use it and be perfectly fine, but you're not going to take it over a few different options that are out there, and that is why I'm putting it in B tier. It's just not really a standout weapon, so middle of the pack is my opinion. But now with that done, we can move into the A tier, and there are quite a few, so let's list these out quickly. In this tier, we have the 30-30, the G7 Scout, the Havoc, the Mastiff, the Mozambique, the Peacekeeper, the Sentinel, and the Volt. Now I'm going to talk about the 30-30 and the G7 at the same time to kind of save a little bit because they're basically going to be the same information. Marksman rifles are still very strong, and especially in the early game when you're trying to get your shield core up so you can get some of the perks, they are still going to be great options. Now the 30-30 did receive some nerfs going into Season 20, and some people seem to think that it's kind of dead in the water and it's not useful anymore, but it is still a very viable option for a marksman rifle. It's not as oppressive as it was in previous seasons, hence why it's in A tier and not S tier, but it is still a solid go-to option. If you liked the 30-30 before, it's still perfectly fine. And the G7 Scout has always been a very strong weapon. It's got a good fire rate, you can spam shots out, it has decent base damage as well, and if you're hitting multiple headshots with a G7, it is absolutely nutty. Marksman rifles are still a great option. They're just not the S tier options that they have been before, but they're still A tier weapons. Now next up we have the Havoc, and this is a weapon that can catch people off guard with how much damage it can do. I've been playing the game since it came out, and I still get caught off guard with how much damage the Havoc can put out, especially off drop. But anything past off drop with the Havoc, you are going to need the turbocharger to really keep up in certain fights. Once everybody has purple armor and also they're just kind of running and deathballing you, the charge up time on the Havoc can get you killed in multiple different situations. There are some ways to play around it, but unless you have the turbocharger, people are just going to take advantage of you. And again, like I've said previously, relying on a gold hop up in order to actually be competitive at a certain point is not the best look for a weapon. But the reason that I have it in A tier and not B tier like the alternator is because the Havoc is just a better gun in a few different situations than the alternator. You're going to be able to out DPS people if you're able to play around the charge up time, and it is a little bit more versatile because of how strong it is in the medium and also the close range. So that is why I have it in the A tier. Now next up we have the 3 shotguns, the Mastiff, the Mozambique, and the Peacekeeper. Right now these are all basically on the same level. It just depends what playstyle you do have when it comes to picking which one you are going to use. The Mastiff is more consistent but doesn't hit as hard as the PK. The PK hits harder but it doesn't have the same consistency that the Mastiff does. And the Mozambique just has the spam potential, and also it does have pretty consistent damage. Hitting somebody for 45 multiple times, and then if you have hammer points, shredding them for 100 once they don't have any armor is insane. Do not sleep on the Mozambique. It's not a troll pickup anymore. Now before people run to the comments and point this out, yes, I do understand relying on a gold hop up is not the best thing, but the Mozambique is not a must run shotgun. If you have a good bolt, then you can just run a Mastiff or a PK. But if you happen to find hammer points off drop and also Mozambique, you can run those and still be perfectly viable. The shotguns are in a really good balanced state right now. It doesn't really matter which one you want to run because they're all viable. So that's why they're all 3 in the A tier. Now next up we have the Sentinel, and the Sentinel is the go-to sniper rifle for one solid reason, and that is the charge up potential that it has. Once you charge this up, and if you're able to hit consistent headshots, you are going to basically have a mini Kraber in your back pocket that is more consistent than the charge rifle. The charge rifle can hit just as hard as the Sentinel can, but it's not as consistent. The Sentinel only needs to charge up. The charge rifle, you need to have the distance and also be able to kind of weirdly edge the charge rifle to make it shoot at the right time. It's weird. I don't want to talk about it. But the Sentinel, you can just keep firing at people, pin people down, catch people off guard, grief some fights, and just be an all-around menace with this weapon. I think a lot of people can agree that the Sentinel is in a very good spot right now, and that is why I think it's an A tier weapon. And the last weapon we have in the A tier is the Volt. Now the Volt is a very solid all-around SMG. And I think a lot of people are going to be wondering why it's not an S tier weapon, and there's one main fact for that. It is not the strongest SMG that's out there. The Volt is a lot easier to use than some of the other SMGs, so you can use it in a lot of different situations, including in some medium range fights because of how the recoil is able to be controlled. But in those medium range fights, you are probably going to lose to an assault rifle like the Flatline or the R301, and once you get up close and personal, you're going to lose out to the DPS potential that the Prowler has, or even potentially some shotguns if played around corners or played properly. The Volt's strength comes from being able to use it in almost any different situation, but it's kind of like a jack of all trades, master of none. It's still strong and still can be used in multiple different situations, but it's not going to outshine any weapon in those situations. But with that being said, it's still strong enough to fit in the A tier, so that's where I'm going to be putting it. And finally, we've hit the top, the cream of the crop, the ones that are going to be the strongest weapons that you're going to be looking to run as many times as you possibly can this season. And finding themselves here are the Car, the Flatline, the L-Star, the 301, the Nemesis, the Prowler, and the Hemlock. Now the Car is the go-to spam SMG right now. If you want a fully automatic weapon that you can run in, deal a bunch of damage, send a bunch of shots at somebody, and still be perfectly fine, the Car is going to be the go-to. It's also really strong because you don't have to rely on one type of ammo or one type of extended mag. Say you're running heavy ammo, but you find a light bag. If you're running something like a Prowler, that's not going to help you, but with the Car, it absolutely does. You are not locked into one specific attachment or one specific ammo type, so you can play around with your specific loadout to help you best fit what attachments you are finding. The Car is incredibly strong. It's taken the spot back as the #1 fully automatic SMG, so that's why it's in the S tier. Now next up we have the Flatline, the R301, and the Nemesis. These are essentially the same weapon with just different uses in different situations. The Flatline hits harder but has harder to control recoil. The R301 doesn't hit as hard but has easier to control recoil, and the Nemesis is is just stupidly strong. Even though it is a burst weapon, you can just hold down the trigger, the game will fire it every single time it's ready, and once it's fully ramped up, it's basically a fully automatic weapon anyway. All three of these are very strong, very viable ARs. They have been for season after season, and there's not really anything that's going to be changing about these. Now, when it comes to picking which one you're going to run, it really depends on what kind of attachments you found in the early game and what your secondary weapon is. Me personally, I don't like to run two of the same ammo types. So if I find a Prowler with a lot of attachments, I'm probably going to opt to pick up an R301 so that I have heavy and light, rather than picking up a flatline so that I'm heavy and heavy. Now, that's just me personally. Some people like to run the same ammo types, but again, you can just kind of play around with it and see, because they're all S tier weapons. They're all going to be perfectly fine. Now, next up, we have the L-Star. And this one did catch me off guard when I first picked it up in season 20, because I wasn't expecting it to be amazing. I was expecting it to be like it has been in past seasons, where it's just really hard to shoot because the bullets are so big. If you can't see what you're aiming at, how are you supposed to be hitting people? But I picked it up quite a few times on opening day, and I absolutely loved it every single time. It felt incredibly strong. I was able to win gunfights, I was able to see what I was shooting at, and I was winning stuff that I should not have been winning because this gun was just very consistent. Now, it is an LMG, so you do not have the strafe speed that you normally would have with something like an assault rifle, so you are going to have to be aware of that. But if you're able to play around it, you can actually pull off some insane stuff because of how much damage potential the L-Star actually has. This is one of those weapons where its strengths come from catching people off guard, so don't let that happen to you. Play with this yourself and absolutely beam people. Now, next up, we have the Prowler, and this is the weapon that did get removed out of the care package so that the EVA can go in. It did lose its select fire while coming out of the care package, but the burst Prowler is just a better option anyway. It has better damage numbers, it has faster time to kill. If you weren't a fan of the burst Prowler before, try to learn it because it is absolutely insane. In fights, it does have the potential to 2-burst some enemies. And even if you're not downing that enemy in that 2-burst, you're also opening up opportunities for your teammates to swing them because of how much damage you just put out. The enemies will not be expecting it, because who expects to be killed that quickly? Now they're back in the lobby, they have no idea what's going on. You have 3 KP, you have your upgraded armor cores, and you're a lot happier than they are. There's not a whole lot that I can say about this SMG because it's just that strong, so I'm going to be leaving it in the S tier where it belongs. And the last weapon in the S tier is the Hemlock, and some people might be saying, well, why didn't you talk about this with the other assault rifles? And it's because I wanted to make one thing very clear with the Hemlock. The nerfs that it has received are not taking it out of the S tier. The Hemlock still has very consistent, good damage output potential. If you're using this on something like a secondary fragger or a support who are going to be playing off angles and allowing their team to get some opportunities, it is still an S tier weapon. There's not a whole lot that people can do against some of the burst potential that this weapon has. And yes, while it is not as strong as it has been in past seasons, it still is an S tier weapon. You are still going to be able to do a lot of damage with it. You're still going to be able to catch people off guard. You're still going to be able to open up opportunities for your team. And worst case scenario, if you don't like the burst, you can swap it over to single fire and send some shots at people that are at longer distances. So it does have some play in the versatile range as well. But let me know what weapons you guys think are going to be standouts in season 20 in the comments down below. And while you're scrolling there, remember to sign up to Raid Shadow Legends by clicking the link at the top of the description box or by scanning the QR code that you see on screen right now to start your account with a free epic champion. Thank you guys all for watching. Once again, I'm 8 Second Gaming. I'll see you guys in the next one.